Ladies and gentlemen, everyone around and in between, it is Debate Sensei, NFA LD Edition. We talk about things relevant to the National Forensics Association Lincoln Douglas event. As always, I have Dr. Justin Kirk from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. Thank you, Dr. Kirk.
Happy Thanksgiving week to you, Jared.
Yes. So this will probably air right afterwards. But yeah. So
Everybody enjoying college football on Saturday or football on Sunday when they get this episode dropped.
Oh, yeah. Let me see here. I'm going to people watching might notice that my appearance is probably significantly different. And so I shaved my head for charity, and this is my page right there. You'd have to type it in, I guess, maybe pause it and do that. Because it's recorded, I can't put maybe I'll put the link in the description, but it's for St. Baldrick's. It is a children's cancer research foundation. People shave their head in solidarity of kids going through cancer treatment. I've been doing it for 15 years, and it is actually my group dynamics class project. So they have to actually do all of the organizing and event planning and, getting all of the stuff lined up for that event. I figured that, I don't know any group dynamics class if you've taught them or taken them, but it was always these group projects that didn't have any stakes. There wasn't any risk. There wasn't any sort of real stakes involved. And like, how can I put some like real stakes involved? And this was my solution. So
I've always found that like when you pair with organizations like that out of the classroom, students get so much more out of those projects, right? They feel like they actually have an impact on things. And so, I would encourage anybody to go to the webpage and donate.
Absolutely. So you can also just go to St. Baldrick's and look up for Santiago Canyon College. We had our event on November 25th, but we are still accepting donations through December. All right. Okay. Well, anyways, what we're talking about in this episode, though, is debate over winter break. Now, the debate season is interesting because it spans, I don't know, depending on when you start, but from like September to April is usually what I tell people. Most universities, I think, are still on a semester system. Some of them might be on a quarter system that are involved. I don't know too many that are in actual NFA LD that are on the quarter system.
Not many. I think,
as
far as I know, like the only one in the Big Ten is Northwestern, really, if they're still doing the quarter system. There's very few schools, I think, outside of the Northeast that do it anymore. Okay.
Even then, there's certain breaks that are happening. Usually they still fashion the quarter system around the holidays. And so sort of staying abreast of the topic and making sure that you're up to date and ready to go when you come back in the spring is kind of what the focus of this particular episode is about. So I don't know. The first thing I always like using the summer break as my example because in a semester system you have a really long summer break, and I am absolutely horrible about maintaining contact with students or having them maintain contact with each other. And so that's the first thing. Like, okay, how do you make any recommendations to your students about balancing the rest that they need to get as well as maintaining contact with them?
Yeah. So we do a couple of things, and I think that this is just kind of generally good practice, which is even if we're not meeting during the weeks that we're on break, I'm sending out kind of an email of like, you should be doing the following things in your free time to stay prepared. And we'll go over some of those things that I'm talking about. We'll have a weekly meeting if we feel like we need to get together and talk research, if there's some big particular projects going on. But for the most part, in the last few coaching sessions before we leave for the break, I give them kind of here's what we think the fall semester could have used better. Here's what I think our priorities should be over the break. When you have free time, organize your files, right? There were a couple of rounds we lost because just couldn't find arguments. And that's an easy thing to do in a couple hours on an afternoon. Spend some time organizing. Familiarize yourself with the new file, right? Like things that maybe, you didn't get to go for a critique in a tournament, or you weren't very good at going for a critique. Maybe spend time with that file over the break. So we set up a couple of things that students can do over the break that are self-directed. And then we have obviously assignments that we do.
Okay. Are there any tournaments that you know of that happen over the break?
So other than the Big Tent Online, there's not really an NFA LD calendar over the break.
Okay.
There's sometimes a tournament in mid-January or late January. I think the Great Salt Lake Invitational is sometime around that time.
Oh, really?
The weekend of the Gorlock. I don't know that they've announced yet. But the Gorlock is really kind of the marker for when fall break ends and the spring semester and the rush to nationals begins. And that's almost always the last week in January. It's always like a week after we get back from school. So the students have like a week to kind of get settled in school before we take off for that tournament. But typically, like I would say from the first week of December through the last week of January is just this big like 6-week gap where you're not going to have tournaments. You're not going to be in competitive spaces. So you got to find some way to do that work throughout that break.
Yeah. Would you say that the type of preparation that you do changes? The lead up to, like our last episode, we're talking about, lead ups to tournaments, and you had like 4 of them in the fall, right? And so you're like sitting there cutting cards and you're strategizing for specific teams and things like that. Would you say that it's a little bit more sort of a take a step back and big picture approach?
A little bit. So I think part of this goes along with the like organizing your files during the winter break thing, because I think the winter break is a good time to like take a step back, like you said, assess what worked in the fall, what arguments were persuasive, what arguments weren't persuasive, refine the ones and dig deeper on the ones that were most successful, and then figure out alternatives or ways to reframe the ones that weren't successful over the break. This is your real only opportunity before the like Nats prep month to reset everything you've got in the box, right? And so one thing we're going to do, and then like during finals week, is I'm going to go through all of our files one by one and just dump anything I don't think will be relevant in the spring and make a list of things we either need to revise, recut, rebuild, retire, right? Like all of the 4 R's, revise, rebuild, and retire. Any argument can be like dealt with in one of those 4 ways. And I'll basically go through every file and figure out where we need to do some work. The other thing that you can do during the break too is like scan the field to see what people were successful with, right? A lot of these episodes have been talking about like who's been successful at tournaments. Go check out those teams' wikis. What are they winning on, right? What counter plans are they going for? What disads are they successful with? You're going to need a new generic disad because the elections disad is not going to be relevant, right? There's probably going to be some good politics disads. Given the nature of what's going on in the House, right now, Johnson has a 1-seat majority going into the spring.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Right? Which means that like politics is going to be very, very good as a disad because small shifts in political capital could cost Trump a moderate Republican here or pick him up a moderate Democrat somewhere else, right? Or a conservative Democrat somewhere else. And so I think politics as this kind of progresses will be a very good generic that people will shift to in the spring semester.
Okay. Seems like a good opportunity for maybe doing a deep read, like a full length book, right? It's like if people find themselves taking a trip somewhere, like take a full book on something with you. And we went over a bunch of authors. People should go back and check that out. Do you make any recommendations to students about that?
Typically there's AFs that we're working on for the Gorlock. Right. I think everybody kind of re-rolls their affirmative dice for the spring semester, right? And so every one of my students is working on something right now. And I will probably send each of them a different thing to read related to that project. Do you think that like you're with family, you want to get away for 30 minutes, go read a debate book, right? Read something. You don't have to get cards out of it, right? You can just like take notes and come back to it at the end of break and say, okay, now I know where the evidence is. I'm going to go recut these cards when I'm like in a productive debate space around other teammates or with a coach where they can give me feedback. But yeah, like general topic knowledge, critical literature is always good over the break, right? If somebody's reading a critique that you're not familiar with, or that like they were reading from a book that you haven't read yet, or that you don't have access to, spend time looking for it. Read around. I think that the break is the time to go deep, not broad.
Right. Okay. Deep, not broad.
Yeah.
Are there any like camps or co-ops? Do anybody, is there any sort of intercollegiate activities that ever happen?
Not over the break. I mean, one thing we do, and I'm not recommending this for everyone because I don't know that everybody has the resources to do this, but
Right.
One thing we do is we go to a few NDT tournaments over the break. If the students have files ready, if we feel like we can go and be competitive, we'll go to the Sunflower Swing at Kansas and Kansas State.
Okay.
It's a 3-hour drive for us. It costs us basically nothing to go down there for the week. It's right after New Year's. But it fills that kind of middle gap in January where you're like, they've had 4 weeks off from tournaments. We've got 3 weeks before our next tournament. How do I keep the engine running? Well, 12 debates in 5 days is a really good way to do that.
Okay.
And it does take a lot of preparation. I'm not going to be doing research for the NDT topic. That is on our students. And if they're not ready, we're just not going to go. But it is like an option for students that are looking for like, how do I compete during this time when there's just no competition in NFA LD? I'm not really familiar with what the world schedule or the BP schedule would be during the break, but I know that like most schools are not very active over the winter break.
Right.
The NDT CETA circuit's the only one I'm familiar with that like has always consistently had tournaments over that New Year's week.
Yeah. I remember, I went to Long Beach, and so they had speech at the beach,
or USC Fullerton back in the day, right? Like, where you would go to LA for the week, and just spend the week in LA over in January, which was always a nice treat in January to spend in LA. So that would be one of my suggestions. The other thing is like run practice rounds, even if your coach isn't available or if not everybody on your team's available. You can do redos. You can take an old round that you were really frustrated with and just spend a lot of time with it. Take a day and just be like, I'm going to make this 1AR perfect. I'm going to make this NR just as good as it can be. And I'm going to spend 3 or 4 hours just kind of workshopping every argument and making sure I have it down. Set up simulation debates, right? Practice against people you might debate at the Gorlock and what arguments they might read. And just like give a 1AR with 4 minutes of prep and 6 minutes on the timer, and see if you can do that against Ray Fournier's 1NC against your AF or against Cade's 1NC against your AF, right? I think both of those debaters give good examples of like what practice looks like, because anytime Ray shows up to debate, it's clear they've thought about that opponent in that round previously, right? And winter break is the time to think about all those scenarios.
Yeah. So winter break's a good time to kind of shake things up. Now, I'm wondering in more of a long-term planning. So you come back to your first tournament and maybe you kind of shuffled your affirmative now. Is there any plans to kind of just make that a temporary thing and then you come back to like, or, maybe you're coming back to your first goal, or you're testing out which one works better and you're going to stick with one?
Yeah. I mean, we've gone to the Gorlock with new AVs and had no success with them. And basically been like, okay, well, that was a good idea, but it didn't actually work at this tournament. And it's kind of frustrating when you go to a tournament that's like that big, and your idea doesn't pan out the way you want to.
Right.
But it's not nationals, right? Which means that like it's still an opportunity for you to see what works and what doesn't work. And I would say that like typically any AF that we abandon for the spring semester is not gone. We'll probably revisit and revamp it before nationals. In fact, I know we did this a couple years ago with Nick's affirmatives. I think he had 3 or 4 AFs that he was reading in the fall. We dumped them for the spring semester until the month before nationals, pulled them back out and revised all of them. So we just had like new versions of old AFs from the fall. Because most of the legwork there is already done, right? You don't need to come up with a new idea. You just need to produce a few new pieces of evidence and some new articulations of that evidence. We typically do that like before nationals, but it's also something you can do over the break, right? Like, hey, I already have this AF. Let me just like update it. I'm not going to read it at the next tournament, but it's there if I need it. And I've done a bunch of debates on this in the fall.
It seems like that could also be a conscious strategy, right? Where you're not letting people test out responses on your affirmative and kind of like mixing it up with other stuff, while at the same time you're keeping your ear out for other people that are testing it out and preparing it, so you have your unique responses. So kind of like, I don't know, it's almost like a misdirection type of strategy that could possibly be deployed over winter break.
Yeah, and I think that like that works really well on broad topics, right? And I think maybe this topic is broader than we think, but we haven't seen evidence of it yet, right? Like I haven't seen any finance apps.
Oh,
there's no finance apps. Like nobody's read like a business app or a data app that like relates to like big business or economic, like macroeconomic trends. That's
right.
I think that's a big area of the topic that's going to develop in the spring.
Okay.
There's been like an insurance app and a data storage app, but they don't really like access the part of the finance part of the topic that I think is really important, like consumer data,
right?
Or marketing consumer data. So I think that's part of it. But I also think that like, yes, there is a level of misdirection going on at the Gorlock in the sense that some people will roll up with the app that they're going to read the spring semester. A lot of teams do fall semester app, spring semester app. And a lot of teams will just read a throwaway app at the Gorlock knowing that they're going to write a new one before the Grand Prix.
Oh, wow.
Right? Because NFA LD, you don't need 400 cards to write an affirmative. You need about 30. And it takes a couple weeks to do a good AF research. You can always reset and read a new AF at a major national if you need to. You know, and I think a lot of teams lean into that a little bit more than others. You know, we have historically in the past been a team that's just like, we will write a new AF for every tournament if we feel like we need to, just to stay ahead of the curve, just to not give people the opportunity to prepare beforehand. Because I think taking coaches out of the room and making the debaters think on their own in prep time is like a very undersold strategy.
The New Year's that occurs over winter break seems like a really great opportunity for people to sort of reset their goals. Is there any sort of moment that you take as a coach to kind of help refocus people's goals? I don't know, ever pulling back or accelerating or what their overall goals are?
Yeah, I think we kind of do this like consistently throughout the year, but I do think that like New Year's is a good time to say, okay, what is our expected outcome in NFA?
Yeah.
Right. What do you want? Where do you want to be at the end of that tournament? Do you want to be in doubles? Do you want to be a 3-3 debater? Like, and then what do we need to do to win the debates to get you there? Right. Sometimes the debater's like, look, my goal this spring is to like read some arguments I haven't gotten to read yet. It's my senior year and I've already got my bid. Right. And I just want to have fun until nationals. And then I'm going to like flip it back to competitive mode. So some of my debaters, like in the spring semester, like I've got my bid. I like these arguments that I've been working with. I don't think they're going to be super successful. So I'm not going to read them at NFA, but I am going to read them at these tournaments I'm going to in January and February.
That's interesting.
I would rather have fun in the next 2 months before nationals than just like constantly be grinding and trying to compete.
That's really interesting. I think that's like one of the unique moments in the season, but also because of the nature of NFA LD, where you have to qualify in order to get to nationals. Whereas CETA has an open national tournament, NPDA has an open national tournament, but that characteristic, sort of that dynamic that occurs, means that usually you are qualifying in the fall, and everyone who does qualify now, it seems like there is that greater chance that you might see a variety, especially from the people who already qualified, in order to bring something out.
Well, and we do two things once you have your bid, right? We look at like what competitive level are you at? So if you're debating in novice when you get your bid, right? Or if you're debating in JV, we're going to put you in open debates for the rest of the year once you have your bid. Even if you're going to get clobbered and go 1-5 or 0-6 at the Gorlock, because NFA is an open pool. There is no novice division. There's no JV division.
Okay.
Everyone from the best debater in the country to the worst debater in the country is open for you to debate. And so one thing we do is once you have your bid, we refocus to like, you need to kind of move up the chain. So when we get to nationals, you're not like worried about debates against varsity debaters.
Right.
The other part of that comes along with it is learning new argument types. So if a debater has never gone for topicality or a counterplan, the spring semester is a great time to say, okay, at this tournament, you're only going to go for counterplans on the negative if they're a viable strategy.
Interesting.
You're just going to practice going for counterplans and get feedback because you need to add that tool to your toolbox, or you're just going to go for topicality at this tournament. We had a debater who got their bid, I think, at the second tournament of the year at Southwest Baptist. And at their third tournament, they went for T in 3 different debates because they were like, I just want to go for T. I want to spend 6 minutes making this argument and get better at it.
Yeah.
And by the end of the tournament, they had a list of like 10 or 15 questions of like, okay, what do I do here? How do I win the debate on this question, right? And then they get better at another tool in the toolbox. And by the time we get to NFA, hopefully everybody can do disad, counterplan T, critique debate, right? Because that makes a dangerous debater. If you don't know what they can go for in the NR, if everything is available to them in the NC, those are the most dangerous debaters, right? That's Cade in a nutshell. That's Nick Wallenberg. That's Andre Sway, right?
Yeah. Do
tough
some debaters over the break just decide to take a step back? Especially, I don't know, sometimes there's the attitude about like trying to allow as many people to participate in the national tournament as possible, and that you're kind of crowding people out if you just maintain this level of success.
Yeah, I mean, there is a level of that. And I think that like part of it is, I think we should absolutely add this as a topic for a future episode, because I have a lot of thoughts about the bid process. I feel like part of what COVID taught us is that NFA is more about inclusivity and engagement and community building and including as many levels of debate as we can. Our novice divisions this year are the strongest I've ever seen them. That's fantastic, right? Washburn, Fullerton, Illinois College, they have huge novice pools right now. I think that's great. But part of my frustration when we go to nationals is sometimes you'll see a senior who got to NFA their freshman, sophomore year, but just didn't get a bid their senior year, right? Because they were a JV debater, and then when they moved up to varsity, they never made the like competitive step to win those debates.
Right.
They didn't get their bid their senior year because they're debating in varsity, and maybe they went 3-3 at every tournament they went to.
Right.
And so kind of one thing I want to revisit in the future is like, should the national tournament be open for LD competitors, or should we change the bid process so that it privileges those students who have spent 4 years in the activity and given, hours and hours and hours to NFALD and didn't get a qual to Nats? I can think of 4 or 5 debaters that's happened to since I've been at Nebraska. That is just,
wow.
It's really frustrating, because I think that those are the students that most deserve to go to nationals, right? They're the ones who started as novices, became JV debaters, became varsity debaters, and they deserve a chance to compete in their senior year. So I know that's kind of a tangent, but we'll revisit this in a later episode. I think it's a really important thing about NFA.
No, I think we had one about rules and proposals for changing bylaws at NFA. That would be a really good topic for that one as well.
As far as like the like competitive part of it goes, though, I think that like when you're thinking as like a director or a coach about how to maximize your season, right? NFA is a big tournament. And so one of the things we do is we kind of rotate students through the squad throughout the year. So like not everybody's going to the same tournaments, and not everybody's going to every tournament. It keeps the burden off our students, helps us get like more bids to nationals. And honestly, like at the end of the day, I haven't noticed when we get more bids, other teams get fewer, right? Oh. Everyone seems to say, like, I think last year we had like 15 people at nationals. The year before we had 10. I didn't see 5 fewer bids from another school that was competitive. Everybody who I thought was going to get a bid to nationals got a bid to nationals, except for maybe like 1 debater or 2 debaters, right? So I think in the end, there's enough variety of tournaments. Coaches are rotating their squads, the bigger ones especially, and that means that everybody's got a shot at some point. And there's a bunch of tournaments in the spring that kind of fit in between the major nationals. So we host the McGaffey. There's the Missouri Association of Forensics tournaments. There's a few smaller tournaments. There's the Sac State tournament in April that I think are really great places to go and get a bid if you're worried about something like that, like getting crowded out by the bigger schools, because a lot of them will only do the major nationals in the spring. They'll do the Gorlock, the Grand Prix, and nationals, and maybe add 1 more. But those smaller tournaments, they won't show up with 12 debaters at. So you have a better chance to get your bid, to get some competition against that kind of mid-tier level of competition. And I think that those are good opportunities to look out for in the spring as well.
Okay. Hey, in your experience, do you see any major shakeups in the top level of competitiveness? Specifically, what I'm saying is, do some debaters rest on their laurels and then sort of fall behind? Do some of the more hungry debaters put in the work? And it's like, is there ever shakeups over the winter break that happen?
Yes. I think of last year in particular. Chase Shockley from Western Kentucky, apparently, I had rumors that they were putting in the work, right? I talked to Chad a couple times. Chad's like, Chase is grinding. And then they showed up in the spring and just were a different debater.
Oh, wow.
Right? And the other one, Cole Ingram was another one from Western Kentucky that just like clearly put in the work over the break,
right?
And like showed up as like next level. Like they leveled up over the break. They did a bunch of practice. It is possible to do in 3 weeks, 4 weeks. If you just look like every time I'm not working on school, I'm going to get up and do 8 hours of debate work a day. That's not something I would recommend. I think that like work-life balance is important. And that's why I love like NFA LD is that there's the space for that. But I also think that like there's some debaters who are like, I've got a month before nationals. The only 2 tournaments that matter to me in the spring are the Grand Prix and nationals, or the only one that matters to me is NFA. And so I'm going to get my grades right. I'm going to do some debating, but I'm not really going to lock in till April 1st.
Okay.
Knowing I've got 2 full weeks and 3 full weekends to prep for nationals before I even leave. Right. And that's plenty of time to actually do the work necessary to be successful. I like doing things piecemeal so it doesn't feel like you're postponing and putting everything on those last couple of weeks.
Right.
But I think that like that is much more up to the debater's motivation, what makes them feel like they have a balanced debate life balance, right? Like that's really hard to inculcate in somebody,
right?
Is how to balance those things. Some people just enjoy the escapism of debate, right? And going to cut cards instead of thinking about school. And some people are like, I don't want to do debate work today. Well, you got to work with both. And figure out ways to get both of them active in the winter time.
Well, that's okay. So one thing about the winter break is that it is an opportunity for a little shakeup at the top levels. And so somebody, I could see how, you're like, I'm going to take this 1 year of my life and sort of invest my holidays toward this activity that I love. And you can make a big difference in your outcome. Yeah.
And as evidence of this, right? Like we took 4 debaters to the Sunflower Swing last year, right? Of those 4 debaters, I think one of them had debated in varsity before that tournament in NFA LD. 3 of those 4 debaters cleared at nationals. And my first year, Serena was 5-1 at nationals after going to PT tournaments, right? So like keeping the engine running, learning debating when you're like, and they all were like, we're just going to spend the break doing debate work, right? And they all showed like by NFA that had kind of material results on their outcomes.
Okay.
They were quicker, they were clearer, they were more organized. And I think that like getting a different kind of feedback from different kinds of judges also helps you become a more well-rounded debater.
Yeah. And I can say from my experience is that it works best when you have more buy-in from the students than from the coaches. You can't have, the coaches can't be the ones that have the most, time to give, the most motivation, the most energy. It's like you're arranging this stuff as a squad from the students is probably the best way for you to get those results that you want.
I tell people the one thing you can't teach students is motivation.
Yeah.
You can teach them skills. You can teach them research. You can teach them critical thinking and organization, but you can't make them want to debate.
Yeah.
Right. And so somehow you have to meet them in the middle. If they want to debate a little, then meet them where they're at. Right. You can't force somebody to want to debate a lot.
Yeah.
The ones who are going to want to debate a lot are going to do it, and they're going to want to. Right. And I think part of being a good, student-centered coach is recognizing that not everybody has the same level of motivation, the same needs or desires, the same goals in debate, honestly. Right. I've got some students who are just in debate to be around the community and hang out with the team. And they're like, this is where my friends are. And I'm good at debate, but like, I don't do this for the competitive success of the trophies. I do it because my friends from high school are here.
Yeah.
And I think that thinking about what your students value and then maximizing that over the winter break, over the spring, if you're a team that likes doing stuff together, the winter break's a great time to like get together and have a team party. To, do some like culture building, right? We do a party the week before finals to just get everybody's mind off of school. We play board games, we have hot chocolate, pizza, whatever, watch a movie. By the way, this year I've got a special one for them. Recommendation to all of our podcast viewers. If you're a fan of really weird Christmas movies, check out Rare Exports on Amazon. I'm going to go ahead and plug it here. It is a Swedish film, maybe Finnish, about Santa Claus. But Santa Claus, the real person, not Santa Claus, the imaginary person. And it is like, imagine Metallica made a winter horror movie about Santa Claus. That's what this film is, and it is delightful because the main character is like a 12-year-old boy. And so it very much is like Christmas Story, but twisted on its head.
Right.
And very Scandinavian.
Okay.
But I would recommend it. I think I may show that to my team this year because I really enjoy that film. We watch it every year at Christmas. It's a good treat.
Excellent. Speaking of plugs, I'm going to give one last time my page right there for donations, St. Baldrick's. Check that out. Justin, thank you so much. Hopefully this helps some people over the winter break. We might have an episode or two more before we take our own break in this series as well.
Yeah, and I would just say to anybody watching this, any work is good work.
Any work, yes.
Any work is good work over the break. A lot of us want to kick back, play video games, watch TV, veg out, eat a lot of food and sleep on our couch. And that's great. But any work on Debate is good work over the break.
All right. Whatever it is. Excellent. Okay. Well, we'll be back for an episode or two more before we take our own break. And I will see you then. All right.
Have a great one, Jared.
Bye.